After having overheard the conversation between Mr. Floor and his mother, Tracer understood that if he was going to be saved from the doom that lay ahead of him, he would have to do his own saving. The question became, how could he apply what he'd learned to actually save himself? Apparently, people aren't very good at saving anything, and Tracer realized that he was likely no exception, regardless of what help might come from the other side of the fabric. At the end of the previous winter, aware that he'd come to the end of the make-believe age of his life, Tracer tearfully said goodbye to the others for the last time. He'd created them over the years when slipping through the fabric was something he could do at almost any moment. They were always there waiting for him, but things had begun to shift. His parents started fighting, and he became scared of what the changes meant. He tried to stay engaged in this world as much as he could, and the world through the fabric faded both naturally and unnaturally. Additionally, he'd always known that the fabric only ripped wide enough to pass through in places where powerful emotions welled. Real love, real excitement, affection, and real fear were the emotions that ripped the fabric the cleanest. A good tickle fight with his dad or a snuggle with his mom used to rip the fabric floor to ceiling, and he could spend the rest of the day through the rip with the others. The same was true of turning off the lights and getting close to the closet door, because it terrified him. Now his dad was gone and his mom was disturbed, and being alone in the dark, even outside, had become blasé to Tracer. Love and excitement, as well as the fear that spills from the imagination, were all but gone. Ugly fear had won the day in ways that he couldn't foresee. Not even the threat of being discovered by his mother and Mr. Floor had been enough to rip the fabric. This meant that even getting through the fabric was probably all but impossible. He was likely stuck on this side forever. Even so, if he could get through the fabric in any way possible, if he was even still capable, he would certainly drill the others for answers. The others had helped him understand countless things over the years, like why does water flow? How long does it take to grow up? Why was Mom so mad when I broke that vase her grandmother gave her? Because let's be honest, that vase was ugly. But now the questions were bigger. What happened to Dad and why? Why do good people fight? Why do people dislike others who disagree with them? Why did his grandma love him one day and then hate him the next? Why are adults so totally helpless? Not to mention all the questions he discovered in the library, like why do countries fall? Why did people ever enslave each other? And countless others. There was no use standing around like the adults who watched their accomplishments turn to chalk. Tracer had to get through the fabric, and in lieu of how hard it was to feel anything other than frustration, Tracer understood where he could go to find imagination fear thick enough to rip the fabric right through. Over the last few weeks, a new sinking feeling had been growing. Perhaps everyone had been telling him the truth. Perhaps, as his mom had admitted in the car, the adults were helpless and really didn't have any idea what was happening to them. Getting answers to questions that they didn't even have the sense to ask might be something he could bring to them. This was heavy stuff, and as he sat on the old musty couch staring at his hand, it became more clear that now was the time to go back through the fabric. With that understanding came a new fear. What if he couldn't get back to this world if he did manage to get through to that one? Outside, snow fell. Tracer's mother had remained pensive and quiet since they'd arrived home. She quietly cooked dinner and hummed old songs in the kitchen with the oven door jawed open to heat the little house in lieu of a functioning furnace. Though Tracer had read about furnace repair, his mother wouldn't let him touch the old thing. Apparently it was better to take the risk of killing yourself with unvented carbon monoxide than it would be to let him try to fix it. Typical adult logic. "Mom, I'm going to play outside a bit before dinner while it's snowing." He smiled, but she frowned. "Dinner will be ready in 30 minutes. Not tonight, Tracer." "But it's snowing," he said, and could all but see the others waiting at the only place he was actually afraid to go, the bluff where he'd just seen the glint of Kagrimpa's amarylite pendant when they pulled up in the car. The others were probably twiddling their paws waiting for Tracer, each one full of answers he needed, the rip in the fabric shimmering behind them. She sighed and looked up at the ceiling. 15 minutes, and don't leave the yard." "We'll see, Mom. An hour tops." He smiled but wasn't joking. Tracer felt his thick hair bounce when he nodded. "Very funny, Tracer." Tracer was struck by a strange memory of his father's eyes. The entire world seemed to notice that Tracer's eyes were a perfect rendition of his dad's, as if plucked out and handed to Tracer. Adults always seemed to enjoy pointing out that Tracer was very much like his dad, but smarter by far. Tracer recognized that his nature and his father's nature were at once very similar, but also completely different. His grandmother was the one who'd informed Tracer that both their natures were vulnerable to demons. Unfortunately, no one would tell him what the demons were. His father had already been ripped apart and dragged away into the fog of darkness by the very demons that no one would explain to Tracer. Worse yet, thanks to his recent eavesdropping, Tracer now understood that his father's failure basically ensured that Tracer would be ground up and eaten as well. Mr. Floor had said as much. Everyone had said as much. Problem was, that's all they'd said, which was worse than saying nothing at all. Aunt Sarah once waggled her finger at Tracer's nose. "Don't be like your dad, Tracer," she said. "He might be smart like you, but he's an idiot with no brakes, no compass, and no map. And he thinks he knows everything." When Tracer told his dad what she'd said, he laughed and replied, "Well, at least she knows I'm smart. That's heaps more than I can say about her." He slapped his knee. "Your mom's whole family is just like her. And what has it done for them? Even the church they go to is a dump. Dumpy people with dumpy lives. And they have the gall to tell my son that I'm an idiot?" Less than 2 months later, his dad had become a mindless zombie of some unexplained variety and disappeared. So then, who was right? Tracer wondered. Who was an idiot and who was actually in the dump? "Half an hour. Don't leave the yard. And don't go anywhere near the bluff," his mother said. "I'll keep as safe and dry as can be given the circumstances, Mom." Inside his right mitten, he pointed 2 fingers and curled his thumb over his ring finger. Then he thumped his chest 3 times at the heart, the military salute that the others use when referring to the order in all its might and splendor. Tracer knew that his mother loved it when Tracer assured her. He always kept his word. Almost always. He wouldn't this time. She wouldn't tell him anything, so what was the point of keeping his word? The only other time Tracer had the nerve to eavesdrop, he'd heard his mother telling Aunt Lily, who was the only person in the extended family she still spoke with, that Tracer had darkened inside, and it all seemed to be grinding him up. She also told Aunt Lily that his pain showed in his neurotic probing for answers. The closest thing to the truth that Tracer had heard in the last year had been his mother telling Aunt Lily, "Though I've seen the collapse of my marriage and the cruel judgment of my family, Tracer's entire universe had changed into a dark, chaotic cloud of destruction." Tracer had made sure he didn't cry through any of that darkness. Not through the yelling nor the fights. Not even when 2 weeks after his dad had disappeared, he showed up one night stinking like something rotten and screaming unintelligible chaos at his mother, like a zombie. Tracer didn't even cry when everyone except Aunt Lily and Uncle Miguel called to inform his mother that they had disowned her and Tracer, in the name of righteousness, whatever that meant. "Why do they hate us?" he blurted at the Labor Day picnic that used to draw aunts, uncles, cousins, multiple barbecue pits, and coolers of sugary cavity water. This year the party had dwindled to just him and his mother eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches in the park. "They don't hate us, Tracer," she replied, and glanced around in that way that showed her pretty neckline. Then she locked her eyes on a hawk making lazy loops atop a rising thermal above the park. "Yes, they do. They hate us because of what happened with Dad. They hate Aunt Lily because she married Uncle Miguel. He's a good guy. Why aren't we helping each other? We all need help right now, so where are they?" He remembered the way she looked at him and how her face seemed to gray with age as she spoke. She made the same helpless expression that she'd just given him in the car after the teachers' conference. "I love you, Tracer. That's all that's certain right now. We have these sandwiches and this day in the park, and I love you." Though the feeble answer served to stop the conversation, it didn't answer anything at all. The only thing he felt was a pinch more of the same directionless frustration and the incessant hunger to know. After Tracer zipped up his coat and was ready for the snow, she kissed him on the forehead. "I love you, little mister," she smiled. "The feeling's mutual," Tracer said, using the same words that she had said to Aunt Sarah. Tracer didn't know why he did. She frowned for an instant before she kissed him on the forehead again and forgave him for the darkness that Tracer knew had begun showing like the spines of something horrible poking out from deep inside. He walked into the snowy night straight toward the forbidden bluff behind the house. If he'd known that might have been the last time he ever saw her, he would have hugged her and held her and made very sure she understood just how much he did love her. That might have been enough to rip the fabric right there in the living room, but he had no idea what was waiting between the trees atop the bluff. Tracer should have known better. He had already learned that life isn't predictable. You can't just plan the last time you see someone. Sometimes people just go away, like his dad had, and maybe just like he was about to. But he didn't ponder that until the fabric ripped 10,000 miles wide and the entire world plunged right through. As he squeaked through the snow, a conversation he'd had with Mr. Floor lanced through his mind like a barbarian army. Why do people, good people like Mom and Grandma, do the exact opposite of what they should be doing, just like the Romans? Mr. Floor blinked at Tracer for a moment. "Well, that's a good question, isn't it? When you figure it out, and I'm sure you will one day, please tell me. I don't know the answer, but you," he smiled, "you just might figure it out." This was more adult code speak for, "someday you'll understand." The only thing that might have made it more cliché would have been a wink and a cheesy offering of a knuckle bump. He let his eyes adjust to the blue glow of the moon shining atop the clouds. Through the squeak of the fresh snow he trudged. When he reached the fence, he looked up and let the snowflakes flutter down and land on his face. "Answers," he whispered, and turned his eyes to the craggy bluff. It marked the edge of imaginary fear and real danger, where the fabric lay in tatters, and one misstep might yank him through. No way back, maybe forever.